Leaving a barren soldier like you was my son's greatest decision. Look, his new wife just gave the Vance legacy a perfect male heir. The regal voice of Eleanor, my ex-mother-in-law, rang out shrilly across the gala. She sneered in contempt, looking at my uniform heavy with medals like it was trash. Next to her, Chloe, the best friend who stole my husband, stood proudly holding the baby. For 6 years, I swallowed the humiliation branded by the world as a defective woman, but my heart rate did not even waver. Gently running my thumb over the edge of my combat action ribbon, I looked straight into her triumphant eyes and smiled coldly. "Do you really believe that charade, ma'am?" Eleanor's smile suddenly froze. She had no idea the watch on my wrist was already counting down. 5 minutes later, those hall doors burst open. A Marine appeared carrying something powerful enough to burn their proud empire to ashes. Before I tell you what happened, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, but only if the story resonates with you. Also, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. The rhythmic ticking of the diamond watch on my wrist at that courthouse did not just count down the seconds to Eleanor's destruction. It violently dragged my memory back 6 years to the heavy mocking pendulum of the grandfather clock in our estate study. Back when I was just a junior intelligence officer, long before the medals weighed down my chest, I sat across from my ex-husband Arthur in that suffocating room. The air was thick with the smell of his expensive bourbon, a 20-year single malt he poured every evening like a ritual to remind everyone in the house that he was a man of refined taste, a man who belonged to a dynasty. The unspoken tension of 2 years of negative pregnancy tests hung between us like a loaded weapon. I carefully slid a stack of glossy fertility clinic brochures across the solid oak desk, keeping my posture straight, my voice low and disciplined, suggesting we both go in for a comprehensive evaluation. I was not assigning blame. I was seeking a tactical solution to our biological roadblock, the same way I would assess an operational failure in the field, isolating variables, eliminating clear's throat unknowns. In the corner of the room, my so-called best friend Chloe was aggressively filing her nails, the sharp scraping sound cutting through the ticking silence. I noticed her eyes flick up from her manicure, burning with that familiar deep-seated resentment she harbored every time I asserted myself. A year earlier, at a Navy formal, I had received a commendation in front of 200 officers for leading an intelligence operation in hostile territory. The entire room had risen to their feet. Chloe had stood in the back row, gripping her champagne glass so hard her knuckles went white, her jaw locked, watching every officer in dress white salute a woman who had earned something her designer handbags and social climbing could never buy. She never forgave the uniform for commanding the respect she craved. Sitting in that study, she was not there to support me. She was waiting for the explosion. Arthur did not even look at the brochures. He looked at me as if I had just drawn a weapon on him. His political facade, the charismatic senator with the $1 million smile, who kissed babies at rallies and shook hands with veterans for the cameras, instantly peeled away, revealing a fragile, terrified narcissist who was absolutely horrified at the suggestion that his genetics could be anything less than perfect. He violently slammed his hand down on the oak desk, the impact sending his bourbon splashing over the crystal rim, the amber liquid pooling across the polished wood and soaking the edge of the brochures. "The Vance family genetics are never at fault," he bellowed, his voice dripping with defensive venom, pointing a trembling finger directly at my chest. The grandfather clock ticked loudly behind him, indifferent counting the seconds of a marriage that was already dead. I physically recoiled, my tactical restraint kicking in immediately. I clamped my jaw shut, swallowing the sharp retort that burned in my throat like acid. Every instinct screamed at me to fight back, to slam my clean medical logic onto that bourbon-soaked desk. But I had been trained to absorb hostile fire without flinching. Standing near the doorway was David Rossi, a fellow officer who had come to the estate under the guise of discussing a Pentagon briefing. Rossi's eyes darted to the floor the second Arthur erupted. He desperately needed Arthur's political endorsements to secure a prestigious Pentagon liaison position. a stepping stone out of the lower middle-class background that haunted him like a shadow he could never outrun. Instead of backing up a fellow officer, Rossi stared at his polished shoes, actively choosing cowardice to protect his own skin. I registered his silence. I filed it away. I chose the silence of a beautiful soldier. I took the hit for the team. The next morning, before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, I drove myself to the military hospital for a full battery of invasive tests. I sat alone in the sterile waiting room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, staring at the white walls that smelled of disinfectant and institutional indifference. A young military wife across the room clutched her husband's hand, both of them nervous, both of them together. I looked down at the empty chair beside me. I convinced myself this was a necessary sacrifice for the family, the same way I convinced myself that every sleepless night on deployment was a necessary sacrifice for the country. The results came back perfectly clear. My body was functioning flawlessly. Every hormone, every count, every scan textbook perfect. I felt a surge of genuine relief wash through me, assuming Arthur would be thrilled. We had eliminated one variable, assuming he would agree to get tested himself, now that I had led by example. But I was naive. What I did not know at the time, details I would only unearth years later, through classified intel channels and a broken man's confession, was that while I was being prodded with needles at the military hospital town, Arthur was sneaking through the back alley of a discreet private clinic, across with him Sandavan guard at the mouth of the alley like an obedient dog, his eyes scanning the street for reporters. Or anyone who might recognize a state senator slinking into an unmarked side entrance. The private doctor, a nervous man with thinning hair, who owed the Vance family a favor for burying a malpractice suit, handed over a sealed envelope with shaking hands, glancing nervously down the alley, as if the walls themselves might talk. Rossi watched Arthur's fingers tremble as he tore the seal. The paper snorts inside carried a single devastating diagnosis, printed in cold clinical black ink. Azoospermia, complete irreversible infertility. Arthur's face went gray, the veins in his neck, pulsing, his jaw working silently as the foundation of his masculine identity crumbled in a dirty alleyway behind a strip mall. Rossi saw every word on that page. He saw Arthur stuff the document into his inner jacket pocket. With trembling hands he saw the raw terror in a powerful man's eyes, and to secure his Vance-funded promotion, Rossi buried the truth of Arthur's infertility right there in the alley. He buried it deep, and he never looked back. When I returned to the estate that evening, holding my clean medical file like an offering of proof that I was doing everything right, Arthur did not ask about my results. He was already pouring another drink, his fourth of the evening, laughing loudly at a joke Chloe had made about some senator's wife at a garden party. My mother-in-law Eleanor sat in the wingback chair by the fireplace, her legs crossed, her diamond rings catching the firelight, eyeing me with profound disgust as I walked through the doorway. She snorts, looked at me the way a horse breeder looks at a mare that has failed to produce. I stood there holding my medical file, waiting for Arthur to ask, waiting for him to show an ounce of partnership, an ounce of curiosity about the tests I had endured alone. He simply turned his back to me, refilling Chloe's wine glass with a practiced, charming pour. In that freezing silence, surrounded by people who were supposed to be my family, I folded my medical file and locked it in my personal safe in the study. I locked my emotions in a tactical vault right alongside it. I convinced myself that if I just worked harder, if I just earned more commendations, more medals, more classified accolades, I could prove my worth beyond my womb. I did not realize that my military discipline, my ability to silently swallow the blade for the sake of the unit, was exactly the weakness the Vance family would exploit to hang me. The locks I built around myself became the walls they attacked from the outside. Over the next 5 years, the shadows began to creep into my daylight. Eleanor, terrified that a childless marriage would damage Arthur's family man image in the upcoming gubernatorial race, mobilized her dark money media empire with the precision of a military campaign. I was walking through the grand foyer of the state capitol during a formal political fundraiser, wearing my dress uniform, every crease razor sharp, every ribbon perfectly aligned. The air was thick with the scent of expensive catered food, seared lamb and truffle oil, but beneath it I smelled the artificial sickeningly sweet perfume Chloe always wore, a cloying expensive fragrance that announced her presence like a warning siren. As I passed clusters of political elites, senators' wives in pearls, lobbyists in $1,000 loafers, conversations abruptly stopped. I felt their toxic judging stares, burning into my back. A dozen pairs of eyes tracking me, like I was an intruder at my own husband's party. Chloe stood at the center of a group of senators' wives, holding a champagne flute. Her eyes gleaming with the predatory thrill of a high school bully who had finally gotten the popular girl expelled. She tilted her head toward the women, her lips moving rapidly, her free hand gesturing dismissively toward the corridor I had just walked through. She was feeding them a narrative brick by poisonous brick. Her lifelong envy of the respect I commanded in uniform had finally found a weapon more lethal than any she could buy at a boutique. She was painting me as the villain of my own marriage, whispering that I had chosen career over family, that I was cold, that I was broken. She was acting as Eleanor's willing executioner in exchange for proximity to the Vance billions and the social status that came with them. The whisper campaign rapidly mutated into anonymous tabloid headlines. I was standing in my secure Pentagon office, gripping the edge of my steel desk so hard, my knuckles turned white as I stared at the digital news monitors mounted on the wall. A sleazy political gossip blog, the kind funded by dark money packs and read by every political operative in Washington, had just published a devastating hit piece. The headline screamed in bold red letters, "Sharon Morgan destroyed her home for ambition." My eyes darted to the second paragraph where an anonymous source close to the family, undoubtedly Chloe dictating every word through a burner email, was quoted twisting the knife deeper. "She's a dry military machine who can't bear children." I felt the blood drain from my face. Two junior intelligence analysts at the workstations behind me exchanged a glance. I tightened my jaw, refusing to let them see my hands shake. I kept my breathing tactical, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The same rhythm I used before breaching a hostile compound. I locked my eyes on the classified mission reports on my desk, mentally compartmentalizing the public humiliation, treating it like enemy propaganda that I was trained to ignore. But this enemy was not a foreign power. This enemy shared my last name. The poison was spreading faster than I could ignore it. Vice Admiral Richard Cole summoned me to his top-floor office within 48 hours of the article going live. Cole was a man whose entire career was a balancing act of avoiding civilian political scandals and protecting the Navy's budget from congressional vultures. As I stood at attention before him, he paced behind his massive mahogany desk, his uniform stretched tight across his aging shoulders. He did not look at me with sympathy. He looked at me like a logistical liability, a line item that threatened his entire fiscal year. A decade prior, he had watched the defense budget get slashed by angry politicians, retaliating against a Navy scandal costing sailors their lives when ships went undermanned and equipment went unrepaired. That memory made his gaze heavy with warning, his posture rigid with institutional fear. He threw a printed copy of the tabloid article across his desk, the pages fanning out like a spread of evidence at a court-martial. He did not defend my honor. He did not ask for my side of the story. He simply told me in a voice devoid of warmth that the Navy could not afford negative PR during a budget cycle. He ordered me to keep my head down, to absorb the hits, and not to engage the press under any circumstances. The systemic betrayal of my own chain of command, the system I had bled for, stung far worse than Eleanor's bought and paid for lies. I walked out of the Admiral's office, the stiff collar of my dress uniform, suddenly feeling like a hangman's noose tightening with every swallow. I retreated to the officers' restroom at the end of the corridor. I stood before the mirror gripping the porcelain sink until my arms ached and splashed freezing cold water on my face. The drops ran down my cheeks like the tears I absolutely refused to shed. My phone buzzed against the counter. A new deployment notification, 6 months attached to an intelligence task force in the Middle East. I stared at the screen, then at my own dripping reflection. I made a critical tactical error that day. I chose the uniform over my own defense. I did not run to the press to leak my clean medical records. I did not scream at Arthur to defend his wife. I did not hire a civilian attorney. I adjusted my collar, squared my shoulders, and walked back out to command my intelligence unit. I foolishly believed that my competence, my medals, and my unwavering loyalty to the mission would act as an impenetrable shield against their civilian gossip. I was a soldier, fighting an asymmetrical war against billionaires, completely unaware that they were already loading the weapon for the kill shot. The weapon landed on my marble dining table, while I was 10,000 miles away, earning medals in the dirt for a country that would not protect me from its own politicians. A year ago, I returned from a grueling 3-month intelligence deployment in Eastern Europe to a house that was freezing and unnervingly silent. No lights in the windows, no car in the driveway. The warmth was gone, sucked out of every room, as if the house itself had died while I was overseas. On the center of the marble dining table, perfectly aligned with sociopathic precision, sat a thick brown envelope. I did not need to open it to know what it was. The divorce papers. Arthur's signature was already dry in blue ink at the bottom of the front page, the letters sharp and confident, the signature of a man who had already moved on weeks ago. Standing by the doorway to the kitchen was Eleanor. She did not say a word, but her eyes gleamed with a predatory, aristocratic satisfaction that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. She was wearing a silk blouse and pearls, dressed for a celebration, not a confrontation. She was there to personally witness the garbage being taken out. She had finally succeeded in purging the defective blood from her family line, discarding the soldier who could not produce an heir, like a broken piece of equipment, returned to the manufacturer. I did not give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I picked up a pen from the table, a cheap ballpoint left there deliberately, and signed my name with a sharp grating scratch against the thick legal paper. Eleanor's nostrils flared slightly, the only sign that my composure had denied her the tearful breakdown she had come to witness. I felt nothing but a cold tactical detachment, my emotions buried so deep inside my operational training that I could not access them even if I wanted to. I was completely unaware of the monstrous betrayal that was waiting for me just outside those doors. The knife did not just twist, it shattered inside my chest. I watched the evening news broadcast in numb silence from my bare temporary military housing, sitting on the edge of a thin mattress in a room with no pictures on the walls and no civilian clothes in the closet. Arthur had not just left me. He had moved straight into Chloe's sprawling mansion in the Virginia countryside, the one with the white columns and the fountain in the driveway that looked like it belonged on a political campaign poster. And then, a few weeks later, the ultimate political PR stunt detonated across every network. Chloe gave birth to a baby boy. The media heralded Arthur and Chloe as the picture of political resilience and happiness, running soft-focus segments about a love story born from adversity. They paraded the child in front of the cameras, the baby wrapped in a blue blanket with the Vance family crest embroidered on the corner, securing Arthur's family man image for the voters in the upcoming Senate primary. I gripped my ceramic coffee mug so hard. I thought it would shatter in my fist, the bitter metallic taste of cold coffee lingering on my tongue as I watched Arthur kiss the baby's forehead for the cameras. Chloe had used her pregnancy to buy her way into the Vance dynasty, and Arthur, terrified of his own infertility being exposed, had eagerly embraced another man's child to maintain his lie. The entire country was watching a fairy tale built on stolen biology and my destroyed reputation. I walked the bustling halls of the Pentagon the next morning, feeling like a ghost stripped of my civilian existence, invisible to everyone who had once called me a colleague. I passed Commander David Rossi near the briefing rooms. Rossi paused mid-stride when he saw me. He saw the devastation etched into the bags under my eyes, the hollowed-out cheeks of a woman who had not a real meal in days. He knew Arthur's dirty secret. He knew Arthur was shooting blanks, which meant he knew damn well that the perfect Vance heir on television was a complete biological impossibility. That baby could not belong to Arthur. Rossi knew this with absolute certainty because he had stood in that alley and watched Arthur read the diagnosis with his own eyes. But Rossi's desperate need to maintain his Vance-funded political connections, his terror of sliding back into the working-class poverty that still woke him in cold sweats, overrode any shred of military honor he had left. Instead of pulling me aside in that corridor, instead of telling me the truth that would have freed me from 6 years of shame, Rossi quickly averted his eyes, clutching his folders tightly to his chest, and fast walked in the opposite direction like a man fleeing a crime scene. I watched him scurry away, registering his cowardice with a cold, analytical stare. It was the moment I realized that corruption was not just a civilian disease. It had infected the uniform I wore. I returned to my office and locked the door. I was utterly alone. My husband was gone. My best friend had stolen my life and was raising another man's child as a political prop. And my colleagues were too terrified of political blowback to stand by me. I picked up the few civilian photographs I had on my desk, pictures of Arthur and me at a Navy ball, his arm around my waist with a smile that I now recognized as a mask. A Christmas at the estate where Eleanor had made me sit at the far end of the table. I fed them one by one into the shredder beside my desk. The teeth of the machine chewed through every smiling face with a grinding, satisfying finality, reducing the lies to thin white strips that curled and fell into the bin like confetti at a funeral. The uniform was the only skin I had left, the only identity that had not been compromised by their lies. I opened a new classified dossier on my computer and began typing, pouring every ounce of my betrayal, rage, and grief into the mission, converting pain into performance metrics and operational excellence. I made a silent vow to myself in that hollow room. I would climb the ranks so high, I would become so undeniably competent that their money and their lies could never touch me again. But Eleanor Vance was already watching my ascent, preparing to launch the strike that would finally force me to wage war. Several agonizing months after the divorce, my relentless, silent dedication to the uniform finally yielded results. I was officially nominated for the position of Base Intelligence Commander, a post that would give me authority over classified operations and a public-facing military platform. I stood in the Pentagon briefing room wearing my dress whites, feeling a surge of genuine hard-earned pride swelling in my chest for the first time in years. I had bled for this position in overseas black sites, while Arthur was busy posing for magazine covers and kissing donors' rings. I thought my sheer competence had finally outrun their dirty lies. I thought the system would reward what the system had trained me to be. I was wrong. As the briefing concluded and the senior officers began filing out, I caught Commander David Rossi lingering by the heavy oak doors. His eyes were glued to his phone, his thumbs typing furiously beneath the edge of his briefing folder so no one could see the screen. His desperate terror of sliding back into working-class obscurity made him a willing lapdog for the Vance family. He was texting Eleanor Vance, alerting her that the Barren villain was about to gain significant military authority. I watched Rossi slink out of the room, completely unaware that his cowardice was about to trigger the strike that would end my military silence for good. Eleanor could not tolerate my success. If I became a commander with a public platform and access to classified resources, it would threaten the fragile narrative she had built around her son's perfect new family. She deployed her political octopus tentacles deep into the Pentagon's budget committees, reaching through layers of dark money PACs, campaign donations, and whispered threats in Senate backrooms. She did not attack me directly. She did not need to. She threatened the senators who relied on her campaign funds for their own re-election bids, leveraging her billions to slash the Navy's upcoming defense budget if that scandalous officer was promoted. She wanted me buried in the mud, permanently stripped of the only identity I had left. The rumors of the budget threat spread through the Pentagon corridors like a virus in a barracks. Junior officers stopped making eye contact with me in the hallways. Conversations died when I entered the cafeteria. The system I had sworn to protect, the system I had sacrificed my marriage to uphold, was rapidly bending its knee to a billionaire's checkbook. The inevitable summons arrived like a death notice. I marched into Vice Admiral Richard Cole's top-floor office, with my spine straight and my expectations already at zero. The dim light highlighted every line of exhaustion on his aging face. Standing quietly in the corner of the room was Rossi, acting as the silent bureaucratic witness to my execution, his arms folded, his eyes fixed on a spot on the carpet. Cole looked at me, a man utterly defeated by politics. He had spent the 90s watching vital fleet operations get gutted by angry politicians costing sailors their lives on undermanned destroyers, and that memory haunted every decision he made. He was not acting out of malice. He was acting out of systemic fear, the same fear that keeps every military bureaucrat in line. He pointed a trembling finger at the command dossier on his mahogany desk, the folder with my name on the tab. Sharon, I cannot risk the fleet's entire budget over one individual. They have us by the throat. Your name has to be crossed off. Cole looked away, unable to meet my eyes. In the corner, Rossi let out a barely audible exhale of relief. His Vance-funded promotion now secure, his cowardice once again rewarded by the system. The betrayal was complete. Every institution I had served, every chain of command I had honored, had folded like a paper tiger the moment a billionaire waved her checkbook. I did not yell. I did not salute. I turned on my heel and walked out of the office, the silence in my wake heavier than any explosion I had survived overseas. I rode Snorts the elevator, down to the parking garage, in a state of clinical shock, watching the floor numbers descend on the panel, each one a year of service that had just been erased. Every drop of blood I had spilled for this country, every insult I had swallowed from Arthur and Chloe to protect the Navy's image was erased by a billionaire's threat. I stepped out of the concrete garage and into the freezing drizzle. The cold hit my face like a slap, each drop sharp and precise, and my tactical mind snapped into absolute razor-sharp focus. I gripped my car keys so hard the metal bit into my palm, drawing a thin line of pressure that felt like a wake-up call carved into my skin. I realized a terrifying, liberating truth. The uniform could not protect me from dirty money, and my military silence was not a shield. It was a target painted on my back. If I continued to endure, I would lose everything. My career, my dignity, my name. The time for being a good soldier was over. It was time to hunt. The freezing drizzle on my face seamlessly merged with the harsh, cold, fluorescent lighting of a downtown law firm the very next morning. I did not sleep that night. I walked in at first light, my posture rigid, dark circles under my eyes that I did not bother to conceal, and dropped a massive, heavily redacted file onto Marcus Thorne's desk, a former military JAG turned ruthless civilian attorney, with a thud that made the pens in his cup rattle. The file contained every media hit piece, every anonymous quote traceable to Chloe, the documented timeline of Eleanor's budget extortion, Rossi's suspicious communication patterns, and a 6-year chronology of coordinated character assassination. A junior associate in the room nervously glanced at the file, recognizing the Vance name printed on one of the tabs, and quickly excused himself, mumbling about a meeting, terrified of the political fallout. Marcus did not flinch. He opened the file with methodical precision, the crisp rustle of the paper echoing in the sterile room that smelled of bleach and old coffee. His eyes moved across the documents with the speed of a man who had been waiting for a case like this his entire career. I did not need to beg or explain my innocence. I simply pointed to the coordinated pattern of character assassination that had cost me a Navy command. I was asking him to step onto a political landmine with me, and I needed to know if he had the spine for it. Marcus closed the file slowly, his jaw locked so tight the muscles twitched visibly beneath his skin. His memory anchor ignited instantly. Decades ago, as a young lieutenant fresh out of law school, he had watched his commanding officer, a decorated captain, who had never committed a single infraction, take the fall for a corrupt civilian contractor who had bribed 3 Pentagon officials. Marcus had stood in the courtroom, powerless, watching a good man's career get shredded to protect a civilian's profits. That trauma forged his absolute hatred for politicians who used the military as disposable pawns. He knew that taking my case was career suicide. He knew the Pentagon brass would try to crush him, reassign him to a forgotten outpost, bury him in paperwork. He looked me dead in the eye, the fire of a true, uncorrupted soldier burning bright behind his gaze. He clicked his pen with a sharp, decisive snap that echoed in the quiet room, like the cocking of a hammer. We are filing a civil defamation and character assassination lawsuit aimed straight at the Vance family, he declared, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that promised absolute destruction. We were not going to the press. We were dragging them into a court of law where their money could not rewrite the facts. We filed the papers that afternoon. The lawsuit dropped on the Vance estate like a mortar shell in the middle of a garden party. Through my intelligence back channels, I monitored the fallout with cold professional satisfaction. Eleanor went completely ballistic. Her aristocratic, untouchable facade cracked for the first time in her billion-dollar life. She immediately speed-dialed David Rossi. I could easily picture Rossi sitting in his Pentagon office hyperventilating as Eleanor screamed through the phone, her shrill voice turning his earpiece into a weapon, threatening to pull every penny of his political backing if he did not stop me. Terrified of losing his fragile status, Rossi scrambled to launch a counter-offensive from inside the Pentagon. He abused his access to classified personnel files, trying to fabricate a false disciplinary file against me, claiming my lawsuit was a distraction to military readiness and a violation of good order. Rossi was acting like a cornered rat, desperately trying to build a wall of military red tape to protect the billionaire who held his leash. Later that week, Rossi marched into my intelligence unit, flanked by two nervous junior officers who clearly wanted to be anywhere else, holding his fabricated preliminary investigation file in a folder so new, the crease was still sharp. He tried to puff out his chest, attempting to use his rank to intimidate me into dropping the civil suit. I sat at my desk, my hands folded perfectly in front of me. I did not stand at attention. I did not even blink. I looked at Rossi, seeing right through the uniform to the trembling, insecure coward underneath the boy, from the wrong side of the tracks, who had sold his honor for a nicer car and a corner office. I took a slow, tactical breath. I told him in a voice that was barely a whisper that if he proceeded with a fraudulent military investigation, I would subpoena his communication logs with Eleanor Vance. Every text, every call, every encrypted email he thought had disappeared. Rossi turned sheet white. The two junior officers behind him exchanged a panicked glance. He realized too late that once a soldier pulls the pin on a grenade, you do not look away. I was ready for the blast, and I was going to make sure the Vance family caught all the shrapnel. But before I reveal the brutal legal trap we set for the Vance family, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you believe in fighting back against toxic families. Also, let me know in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. The preliminary deposition took place in a heavily guarded conference room at the civil courthouse, the kind of room with no windows and thick walls, designed to muffle the screams of legal destruction. Arthur walked in, flanked by three high-priced corporate lawyers in matching charcoal suits, their briefcases gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than a sailor's yearly salary, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his sleeves, with a casual arrogance of a man who believed money could outrun the truth. Sitting right behind him, pulling the strings with invisible hands, was Eleanor. Her diamond necklace worth more than most officers' pensions, her eyes radiating pure aristocratic contempt every time she glanced at my uniform. Arthur responded to our lawsuit with the staggering arrogance of a narcissist who had never been told no in his entire life. When Marcus pressed him on the origin of the rumors regarding my infertility, Arthur leaned into the microphone with a smirk that made my trigger finger twitch against my thigh. He looked at me with utter disdain, his fragile ego desperate to maintain the lie that he was the genetically perfect Vance heir. I didn't defame her. I just told the truth. She was left infertile due to battlefield trauma. He smirked, glancing back at Eleanor, believing his wealth and political status made his lies legally untouchable. Eleanor gave him a small approving nod, a queen satisfied that her king had performed well. Marcus did not argue, he did not object. He did not raise his voice or slam the table. He just smiled a terrifying predatory grin that only a veteran lawyer who has just trapped his prey can make, the kind of smile that makes defense attorneys reach for their water glasses. As we walked out of the courthouse, the heavy wooden doors sealing behind us with a resonant boom, Marcus adjusted his briefcase, his eyes gleaming with lethal satisfaction. He just put the noose around his own neck. He whispered to me, leaning close enough that I could smell the black coffee on his breath, ensuring the Vance lawyers trailing behind us could not hear. By claiming my infertility was a documented medical fact, rather than just a rumor, Arthur had legally opened the door. He had given Marcus the exact justification needed to petition a federal judge to subpoena Arthur's entire civilian medical history to prove the claim. If he said my infertility was a medical fact, the court now had every right to demand the medical evidence, including his own. But my tactical mind saw the flaw immediately, the same way I spotted ambush points on a terrain map. A subpoena takes days to process through judicial channels. Eleanor's fixers would shred Arthur's azoospermia diagnosis file at that private clinic within hours if they realized the trap had been sprung. We needed the name of the clinic immediately. And there was only one weak link who knew it. I did not wait for the slow grinding gears of the court system. That night, wearing my combat boots and utility uniform, I bypassed the main exits of the Pentagon and slipped into the shadows of the dim, echoing parking garage, a concrete labyrinth of pillars and flickering sodium lights that smelled of exhaust and old oil. I knew David Rossi's schedule intimately. I had been tracking his patterns for weeks. I heard the rhythmic tapping of his polished shoes before I saw him, the distinctive click of expensive leather on concrete, the walk of a man who dressed above his pay grade. He was walking toward his luxury sedan, a gleaming black car bought with Vance political money, fumbling for his keys, constantly looking over his shoulder, as if he could feel the crosshairs settling on his back. The sour stench of his fierce wetsuit reached me before he did. The acrid smell of a man whose conscience was eating him alive. He knew Eleanor's empire was under attack, and the terrifying prospect of losing his status and being exposed as a fraud had him on the verge of a panic attack. As he reached for the door handle, I stepped out from behind the concrete pillar, blocking his escape. Rossi gasped, his car keys dropping to the concrete with a metallic clatter that echoed through the empty garage. His eyes went wide with the cowardly terror of a man who suddenly realized he was not facing a politician in a boardroom, but a trained intelligence officer in a dark garage. He opened his mouth to shout for security, but I moved with lethal precision. I grabbed him by the collar of his uniform, pivoting him firmly against the cold concrete pillar. The impact knocked the wind out of him. I did not yell. I leaned in close, invading his space, my face inches from his, my voice laced with absolute chilling authority. Either confess the truth about Arthur's clinic visit years ago, or face a court-martial for complicity. Rossi completely broke. The illusion of his political armor shattered into 1,000 pieces. Trembling violently against the concrete sweat running down his temples, he choked out the exact address and the name of the private clinic, where Arthur had received his infertility diagnosis 7 years ago. He gave me everything. The doctor's name, the date, the alley. I released my grip, and he slid down the pillar to the garage floor, like a puppet with its strings cut. The ticking time bomb was now armed, and the Vance family was standing right on top of it. 8 days after I broke Rossi in the parking garage, the Vance family's legal obstruction tactics completely collapsed. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing classified briefs with the disciplined focus of a woman who had learned to compartmentalize chaos, when my personal phone began vibrating relentlessly against the glass surface. Incoming texts from Chloe, through the news feeds running silently on my monitors. I could see Arthur and Chloe on a campaign stage waving at voters, Arthur holding the baby up like a prop while confetti fell around them. But behind that fake smile on TV, Chloe was actively cracking. She knew Marcus had secured the subpoena for the private clinic. The terrifying realization that without her perfect baby lie, she was just a manipulative fraud who would be thrown back into obscurity, stripped of the mansion, the designer wardrobe, and the Vance last name was driving her insane. Her message flashed on my screen, dripping with the fake victimhood she always weaponized whenever she was cornered. "Sharon, please stop. This will destroy the baby's future." I stared at the screen. She was not trying to protect an innocent child. She was terrified of Eleanor discovering she had smuggled another man's genetics into the Vance billionaire bloodline, terrified of the day the DNA did not match. I did not reply. I deleted the message with a single tap, watching her smile rigidly on the TV screen across the room. The smile of a woman who knew the ground beneath her feet was about to give way. An hour later, Captain Marcus Thorne walked into my office. He did not say a word. He did not need to. The look on his face said everything. He just silently placed a thick, sealed envelope bearing the private clinic's crest on my desk, positioning it precisely in front of me. I picked up a letter opener and sliced it open with a clean surgical motion, the crisp paper sliding into my hands. There it was. The official medical record stamped and signed by the attending physician, confirming Arthur Vance's diagnosis of severe azoospermia from 7 years ago. The fault snorts was never mine. My womb was not broken. I had endured 6 years of public humiliation. 6 years of being called barren and defective for a lie that my ex-husband had known about from the very beginning. I did not cry, but I felt a massive invisible boulder lift off my chest. A weight so heavy, I had forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. I traced the black ink with my thumb, feeling the indentation of the clinic's stamp pressed into the paper. Arthur had known. Eleanor had likely suspected. Rossi had confirmed it. They had all let the world brand me a defective monster just to protect Arthur's fragile masculinity and his political polling numbers. The sheer sociopathic cruelty of it hardened my heart into pure ice. But Marcus and I both knew the medical record alone was not enough to permanently destroy their political machine. Eleanor Snorts could still spin it as a recent development claim. The diagnosis came after the divorce hire a team of PR specialists to bury the timeline. I needed the final explosive, the one piece of evidence that would make the entire Vance narrative collapse in on itself like a controlled demolition. Using secure military channels, I forwarded a heavily encrypted intel packet to Major Julian Hayes, currently stationed at a domestic Marine base in North Carolina. I watched him open the file via our secure video link. Julian sat in his sparse barracks office, his jaw tight, his shoulders still carrying the desert dust of a man who had never fully come home. His memory anchor ignited instantly. He had been in the desert gripping a satellite phone, with sand-cracked hands, when Chloe had called him 2 years ago to say she had lost the pregnancy. He had collapsed onto the hot sand behind a concrete blast wall, grieving a child he thought was dead, while his squad waited for him to pull himself together. Now he was staring at the timeline on his screen, Chloe's pregnancy aligning perfectly with his deployment leave. Cross-referenced with Arthur's confirmed infertility, the agonizing truth hit him like a freight train. That child on television, the Vance heir, the baby wrapped in the monogrammed blanket, was his blood. Chloe had stolen his son. She had looked him in the eye on a video call from a war zone and told him the baby was gone, while she was carrying his child straight into another man's arms. I did not need to give Julian an order. I saw the jaw of a Marine lock into place. The eyes narrow, the fist close around the edge of his desk. He was ready to go to war for his stolen blood. Julian immediately ran a private DNA test, utilizing a pacifier secured by my operatives at Vance campaign rally. It wasn't admissible in court yet, but it gave him the absolute biological certainty he needed to blow their lie to pieces. The trap was now fully set. All the explosives were wired under the foundation of the Vance empire. I sat back in my chair, staring at the calendar on my wall. The trial date for our civil defamation suit was scheduled right in the middle of Arthur's crucial final sprint for the state senate. They thought it would be a quiet settlement, hearing a chance for Eleanor to throw money at the problem and make me sign an NDA with a gag clause and a 6-figure check. They were dead wrong. I was not going into that courtroom to negotiate. I was walking into that courtroom to execute them on live television, and I was bringing the entire United States Armed Forces a sense of honor with me. The day of reckoning arrived. The civil courthouse was packed wall to wall with reporters, their cameras flashing like strobe lights in a combat zone. Fra. In the very back row, sitting anonymously in civilian clothes with his collar turned up, was Vice Admiral Cole, drawn by the political shockwaves that were already rippling through the Pentagon. At the defense table, Arthur and Eleanor sat with perfect posture, wearing their fake confident smiles, their entire legal team arranged around them, like a fortress of expensive suits. Arthur adjusted his $1,000 silk tie, completely oblivious to the landmine buried beneath the polished floorboards. Behind them sat Chloe, but her facade was crumbling. She looked nauseous, her complexion gray beneath her makeup, her hands shaking as she clutched her designer purse so tightly the leather creaked. I sat beside Marcus Thorne at the plaintiff's table. I wore my service dress uniform, every ribbon and medal on my chest gleaming under the harsh courtroom lights. My spine was forged of steel. I looked directly at Eleanor across the aisle. Her absolute belief that her billionaire status made her untouchable by a lowly soldier radiated from her condescending smirk. She thought this was a game, a nuisance lawsuit she could swat away with a phone call. She was about to learn it was an execution. The judge called the room to order. The gallery fell silent, the kind of silence that precedes a detonation. Marcus did not pace. He did not warm up the jury with pleasantries. He attacked with the precision of a drone strike. He stood up, grabbed the heavy medical file, and slammed it down onto the evidence projector, with a sound like a gunshot that made half the gallery flinch. The clinic's official seal flashed onto the massive screens mounted on either side of the courtroom. The damning diagnosis displayed in clinical black and white for every camera in the room: Arthur Vance has been infertile for 7 years. He deliberately slandered a naval officer to cover up his own defect. Marcus's voice boomed, bouncing off the oak-paneled walls like artillery fire. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. Reporters lunged for their phones, their fingers flying across screens, live tweeting the destruction. Arthur's face drained of all color, his jaw dropping open, his political mask melting off his face as the ultimate threat to his masculinity was broadcast to the entire world in real time. Eleanor shot to her feet, knocking her chair backward with a screech against the marble floor, her aristocratic composure shattering into pure, ugly panic. Her hands clawed at the air in denial, her diamond rings flashing under the courtroom lights like distress signals. That's slander. Then, where did my perfect grandson come from? She shrieked, her voice cracking on the last word, unwittingly setting the stage for her own total destruction. She had just asked the one question she should have never ever asked in a room full of reporters and rolling cameras. At that exact moment, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a boom that silenced every voice in the gallery. Major Julian Hayes marched down the center aisle, his combat boots echoing like a death knell against the marble floor. His snorts was in his dress blues, his chest full of combat decorations, his face carved from stone and fury. The crowd parted instinctively for the enraged Marine. He bypassed the reporters, the lawyers, the security officers, and marched straight toward the defense table, holding the private DNA results from a certified lab in his fist. He pointed his finger directly at Chloe. "This child is my blood, and I demand a court-ordered test immediately," Julian roared, his voice shaking the very foundation of the room, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. He turned to face the gallery, his eyes burning with the rage of a betrayed father, a Marine who had grieved a phantom miscarriage in a desert, thousands of miles from the child that was alive, and being paraded on television under another man's name. Chloe lied to me while I was deployed in the Middle East, and Arthur Vance, he knew the truth, but willingly played the fool to create a political facade to deceive the voters. The Vance dynasty crumbled in real time, right before my eyes, like a building being demolished floor by floor. Arthur collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his trembling hands, his political career dead and buried under the rubble of his own lies. Chloe sobbed uncontrollably, her mascara running in black streaks down her face, realizing she had just lost the billionaire lifestyle she had sold her soul for. Eleanor screamed in denial, sinking to her knees on the courtroom floor as she realized her pure bloodline, the dynasty she had spent a lifetime and $1 billion constructing, was a complete fabrication. The billionaire matriarch is utterly powerless against empirical facts, against science, against the one thing her money could never rewrite: DNA. From the back of the room, Vice Admiral Cole watched the slaughter, a profound look of realization crossing his weathered face. The look of a man who had just understood the true cost of compromise. I did not smile. I stood up slowly, adjusting the crisp creases of my uniform. I looked down at Eleanor, who was staring up at me from her knees with wide, terrified eyes. The first time in her life she had ever looked up at a soldier. I delivered the final blow, my voice cutting through the chaotic shouting of the reporters like a sniper's bullet. The truth doesn't wear expensive suits, ma'am. It just waits for a soldier brave enough to ask the right questions. The aftermath of the trial was swift and brutally comprehensive. The Vance political empire was reduced to smoldering ash within 48 hours. I watched Arthur's withdrawal press conference on the television in Marcus's JG office, both of us standing with our arms crossed, as his humiliated face filled the screen. He was forced to withdraw from the Senate race in utter humiliating disgrace, his face plastered across every late-night comedy show and political commentary segment in the country. Federal agents raided Eleanor's corporate offices 3 days later, launching a massive investigation into her dark money campaign funds based on the financial anomalies Marcus had uncovered during discovery. I received a text from Marcus with a single photo of the FBI trucks parked outside Eleanor's glass tower. Chloe found herself sitting in a bleak family court, sobbing into tissue after tissue as she faced Julian, the man representing the wrath of every betrayed soldier who had ever been lied to from a war zone. The judge granted Julian full custody of his son, permanently severing Chloe from the Vance fortune, and the child she had used as a golden ticket. As for Commander David Rossi, his fabricated investigation blew up in his face the moment Marcus submitted his communication logs to the military tribunal. He was immediately relieved of his duties, escorted off the base by military police, and thrown into a holding cell pending a severe court-martial for falsifying military documents and complicity in a civilian cover-up. The cowards and the liars had finally paid the tab. 1 week later, I stood at attention in Vice Admiral Cole's top-floor office. The heavy oppressive tension from our last meeting was gone, replaced by something far more uncomfortable for him, the weight of accountability. Cole looked at me no longer acting like a terrified politician guarding a budget, but like a true sailor who had just witnessed the devastating cost of compromising his honor for political convenience. He picked up his pen and signed the official reinstatement orders without hesitation, the ink flowing across the paper in a single decisive stroke. He handed them to me, pausing for a moment to look me in the eye. He did not offer a flowery apology. He did not make excuses, but his nod was an absolute acknowledgement of the system's failure and my unwavering resilience. I took the orders, feeling the immense hard-earned weight of the base intelligence commander position finally settled back onto my shoulders where it belonged. The military had failed me, but I had forced it to course correct. I drove back to my bare functional apartment. It was finally time to purge the ghost of the Vance family from my life permanently. I sat at my desk, drafted a single 2-sentence letter, formally severing all legal and personal ties with Arthur and Eleanor, and sealed it in an envelope. No explanation, no farewell, just 2 sentences and a signature. I walked into my bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. I looked at the expensive diamond-encrusted watch Arthur had given me years ago, the watch I had worn at the gala, the watch whose ticking had counted down the destruction of their empire. For 6 years, that watch had been the symbol of my silent, suffocating endurance, a beautiful cage strapped to my wrist. I unclasped it. I held it for one final second, feeling its weight, remembering the grandfather clock, the bourbon, the slammed desk, the brochures, the alley, the clinic, the lies. I dropped it straight into the trash can. The heavy thud of the metal hitting the bottom echoed in the quiet room, sounding exactly like the closing of a prison door behind me. I was finally truly free. I put on my pristine officer's cover and adjusted my collar in the mirror. I stepped out of my quarters and into the crisp, biting morning air. The warm, golden light of the sunrise hit my face, melting away the last remnants of the 6-year winter I had endured. I walked up to the podium at the center of the intelligence base to officially take command. I looked out over the sea of troops, watching them snap into a perfectly synchronized salute. The sound of 100 hands hitting 100 brow lines in unison. The iron discipline that had once been my prison had ultimately become my salvation. They had not broken me, they had simply forged me into something much harder. From today on, I lived my life for myself, governed by my own honor, bowing to no one. Before we end, if this journey of standing up to toxic manipulation brought you some peace, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I would love to read your stories in the comments. How did you finally draw the line and take your life back?